Hello, my name is Connor Quinlan, and in this review I'm going to talk about the picture control settings on your digital Nikon SLR. Now they can be found right here under your shooting menu, as you can see. You go into it and you have 4 different choices that you can choose from: standard, neutral, and vivid. I use vivid most of the time because I take pictures of landscape and wildlife, and pictures like that you tend to want to be a little more vivid. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're using picture control settings is that a lot of people actually don't use these because a lot of people take their images in RAW. When you're using RAW, you cannot use your picture control settings. In other words, they're not applied to any sort of RAW image. However, if you use settings like JPEG or JPEG plus RAW, you can use these picture control settings to manipulate your images inside of the camera. Now, like I said before, you're going to have 4 different choices to choose from here: standard, neutral, vivid, and monochrome. The standard is usually for more portrait shots or more standard shots when you have people in your picture. Neutral is a setting that I actually don't use much, but that would also be a setting that you would use for people as well. Vivid, of course, is used for things like landscape photography, where you want to have more colorful photos. You don't want to use vivid when you're taking pictures of people, however, because it can oversaturate the skin. Now, once you pick the setting that you want to use, you'll be given a lot of other options here. First one is sharpening. Now, Nikon cameras aren't necessarily the sharpest images when they come right out of the camera. Canon tends to be a little bit sharper as it comes out of the camera. Of course, that doesn't mean that Canon images are better, but when using JPEG mode, you're definitely going to want to up the sharpening a little bit. The sharpening is usually set right about here. I usually go up 2 ticks, and then that makes the images really nice and sharp. You don't want to go all the way up to the top because then it looks a little too fakey. Now, contrast, you can change according to which pictures you're taking. Of course, if you're taking pictures of portraits, you want your contrast more centered or lower. For landscapes, however, I usually put my contrast a little bit higher up on the scale. Next one is brightness. Pretty self-explanatory, controls the brightness of the image. Saturation, also explanatory. The higher you go, the greater the saturation. The lower, the less the saturation. And then finally, the hue. Going up changes it more of a greenish tinge, and going down gives it more of a purplish tinge. I usually don't mess with that because the hue is pretty good for me, set right in the center. Finally, you'll also notice that this has a monochrome setting on it as well, which means that you can change your images from color to monochrome right in the camera, so you don't have to do that later. You're allowed to adjust sharpening once again, the contrast, and the brightness. And then you can also choose different filter effects. You can have no filter at all, or you can have yellow, orange, red, or green. Personally, since I like landscapes, I like my contrast all the way up, and I put my filter effect to red. That actually gives me more of a Ansel Adams look about black and white landscape images. And you can actually choose different tonings as well. Right now it's just set to standard black and white, but you can also make it sepia or blue, or all different types of variations of red, yellow, and green, and blue, which is pretty neat too. And that is pretty much how your picture control settings work, and are definitely very useful if you want to manipulate your images inside of your camera instead of manipulating them in Photoshop.